Greetings, folks. Welcome to another one of our Free Friday community classes right here on the YouTubes. This week, I am excited to be bringing you a class on the magic and medicine of topical herbal allies. Now, I know that you might be thinking this class is going to be all about how to make salves and balms and oils, and to some degree, maybe you're a little bit right, but I promise if you stick around, we are going to get into some very rarely discussed aspects of working with herbs on the exterior parts of our bodies and how this can play into deep and profound healing and magical ritual applications. And we will also be looking at three different really special formulas, two from Lacnunga and one from Bald's Leech book. So stick around for that. That's going to be fun. Let's get into it, shall we? So a little bit of an overview of where we will be heading today. We will be looking at what topical remedies are from an herbal perspective, how they show up, what they do, how we should work with them, and when we should work with them, and a couple of precautions because it's good to stay safe. Looking at medicinal virtues and weaving that into the magic and ritual virtues of our plant allies. Then we will be looking at three formulas from the old herbals as promised, and I picked three really interesting ones. I think this will be fun to pick apart. We are going to talk about five individual plant allies that I love thinking about for external applications, and then I will be sharing with you my own formula for creating sealing wax, and we'll talk a little bit about that once we get there, and then finally wrapping up with an invitation to go deeper into this type of plant spirit work. So let's get into it. First, topical remedies defined. So topical remedies are, of course, herbal medicine that we apply directly to the external part of our bodies. And this is a particularly powerful format of herbal medicine, and one that really gets overlooked far too often in favor of teas and tinctures and capsules because they're easier, right? But topical external herbal medicine is such a blessing because it allows us to put the medicine exactly where we need it, right? If you have a cut, a scrape, a bruise, a burn, an ache, a pain, you are able to, choosing the right herbs in the right format of topical medicine, you're able to put that medicine exactly where it needs to go, rather than the formula needing to navigate the entire body, move through the bloodstream, the digestive tract, the liver and kidneys. You put it right where we need it. And for me, that's one of the most pronounced benefits of this particular work. I also really enjoy the fact that topical herbal medicine, be it an oil, a liniment, a salve, a balm, a poultice, a compress, they really require us to show up for ourselves, right? We have to acknowledge the part of the body that is struggling, whether we're in pain or we're doing some healing or it's more on the energetic level, rather than kind of shirking it and avoiding it, which sometimes is the easiest way to navigate some of the things we experience. We really do have to lean in and kind of engage with ourselves and engage with that part of ourselves that's struggling. And we do that through the power of therapeutic touch. It's very difficult to apply topical herbal remedies without the power of touch, right? So this is very important. Some of the more common formats of topical herbal medicine that you will encounter, there's one pictured here on the screen, include infused oils, where herbal materia is infused into a base oil like olive oil or almond oil for a certain amount of time, and then that material is removed from the oil, leaving this nice infused and extracted herbal oil that we can then rub onto the skin, into the hair, into the nail beds, wherever we need it most. We can add some kind of a binder to that, such as beeswax, and create a balm or a salve, depending on what the ratio is. And we'll talk about wax to oil ratios when we get to our final slide. We can think about poultices and compresses, right? Where we are applying material directly to the skin. We're wetting herbs or working with fresh herbs and laying them directly on the skin, or maybe with a bit of gauze or muslin between the herb and the skin. And I also think about washes and baths, right? Anytime we soak in a tub filled with an herbal extract, or we bathe a wound or bathe a particular part of the body in what is essentially a strong herbal tea, we are also working with external medicine. So these are some of the more common formats of how we might work with topical remedies. Certainly not the extensive list, but for everything we're going to be talking about today, except for maybe when we talk about boiling herbs and milk, because that's going to come up when we get into the Lacnunga, of course. These are the ones that you will encounter most directly. So, some of the more common effects of working with topical herbal medicine, as I mentioned before, is we get to bypass the digestive system and put the medicine right where we need it most. We also get to, again, engage directly with the part of our body that needs us to show up, right? If we're getting pain signals, if there's some part of us that has been hurt or is kind of screaming for attention, then we get to engage with that part of our body through this process. And really, what we find with topical herbal medicine, which is something that I think is so important because this is one of the least talked about formats of herbal medicine, is the efficacy is fantastic, right? When we apply herbs directly to the skin, we find that they get to go right to work. And oftentimes we feel better very, very quickly. And we see the results of applying this topical medicine very, very quickly. So for me, the benefits are win-win. There are times when it makes more sense to work with a topical herbal remedy and times when it doesn't, right? If something is systemic, if it's an internal issue, sometimes if it's a mental emotional issue or something in the nervous system, we might want to work with more internalized medicine. That makes sense. But when the issue is topical or at least more distal, right? More surface in the body, it makes sense to do a topical or external herbal remedy. Now, this can be on the surface of the skin, right? A cut, a scrape, a bruise. It could also be one step deeper. Maybe we're getting into the fascia or the connective tissue and there's some tension or tightness. Maybe we are getting into the nerve bed where there is pain or constriction or impingement. Maybe we're going even a little bit deeper, but still external in the grand scheme of things within the body, and getting into the musculature, right? Maybe there's muscle soreness or muscle inflammation or freezing in the muscles. And even though the bones are technically the deepest part of our body, they still have a connective tissue affinity with the more external kind of integumentary skin aspects of being. So we also see many types of external medicine, hit medicine from Taoist herbalism being a big example of that, applied to bone health, right? So think about external medicine, at least on the physical level, right? Because we're going to get into some different angles of this here in a moment, applying to the parts of us that are outward facing, right? That face the world outside of us, that face otherness, that face the part where we stop and the world around us begins. So before we go any further, I do want to just note a couple of precautions. I'll bring a couple of these up again later because they will become relevant. But first, if you are working with a heavy oil or a salve and you have an active infection, sometimes, sealing up an active infection with some of these herbal medicines is not a good idea. We want them to be able to breathe. We want the body to be able to respond. We want the seeping action of the skin to be able to happen. And if we are putting on these heavy, waxy, or oily topical herbal remedies, sometimes we get in the way of that. Also, with burns, we want to ensure that the body can release the exterior and shake off excess heat. And if we're slathering on really heavy ointments, that can be, quite problematic. You also need to think about the type of base oils. If you're doing a balm or salve or oil, making sure they're not going to block your pores if you're using them on your face. When in doubt, a nice, fomentation, a nice soak or a poultice can always be nice and light while getting the materia of the herbs right where you need it. So, a couple of the medicinal virtues, which we've already talked about a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper into. First is skin deep healing, right? A lot of the applications that we see for topical herbal remedies are about healing the skin. We have a cut, a scrape. Maybe we're recovering from a surgery. Maybe there's an irritation or a burn or a contact dermatitis. Maybe we've come into contact with some poison ivy, right? These are all opportunities for us to put that medicine right where we need it to bypass the internal processing system and get the herbs where the body needs them most. And they will go to work, right? Sometimes it's hard to think about the skin's ability to extract medicinal virtues from, let's say, an oil or a balm or even a fomentation, a tea wash, but they will, right? It will happen. And we see the effects of this quite dramatically and generally quite quickly, which is why when we look at the existing herbals, especially those ancestral herbals that have been handed down century after century, there are always a big number of topical applications. The connective tissues getting into tendons and ligaments, into fascia, into the various layers of skin tissue, fascial tissue, and muscle tissue. These topical remedies are so effective, and they really get in there and deliver not only the phytochemical benefits of the plants, but also the energetic, where we're looking for cooling to help quell excess hot inflammation, or maybe we're looking for heating to move a stagnation or frozen joint or bruising or blood stagnation, right? They will get in there. And again, as mentioned earlier, these topical remedies will go muscle and bone deep. And there's no better example of that than the Jiao tradition of Taoist or Kung Fu herbalism, right? Where these medicines are being crafted in a liquid, sometimes an alcohol, sometimes a really light oil format, so that it can penetrate the skin and get into the muscle and bone to help with injuries, to help with bruising, soreness, aches, also to strengthen, right? To strengthen the tendons, to strengthen the bones. This particular Jiao medicine comes out of Kung Fu, right? It comes out of Taoist martial arts practice, where the strengthening and resilience cultivation of connective tissues is really what makes a person successful in those particular arts. So, very important. Then we have the magical and the ritual, right? And this is probably within an aspect of herbal medicine that is rarely talked about. This is talked about even less, right? So, of course, we're going to spend some time getting into this. And I want to start our conversation here with the Hama. So the Hama is an aspect of the 9-part self in early English paganism that represents a field, a membrane, a shield of protection that closely follows the outline of the physical body and also holds other aspects of the self in place, right? So if we think about the parts of us that travel while we sleep and dream, or the parts of us that project through planning or creativity into the future, or the aspects of our spirit that can move between the worlds, we always hope that we will return to the leech, right, to our physical body. And it is the Hama that acts as the protective layer, the protective shield around us to pull ourselves back into self. And so when we are working with topical herbal medicine, we are, of course, coming into direct contact with the leech, the physical body, but we are also able to interact directly with the Hama, with that shield of light, that shield of energy, that membrane that surrounds all of us. In traditional Chinese medicine, in Taoist anatomy, we could talk about the Wei Qi, right? The effortless body of light that surrounds us, maybe even uh, comparing this to the concept of an aura, right? So these topical medicines then allow us to act on the body physical, as we've discussed already, but we are also acting on the body subtle, the energetic aspects of self, the spiritual aspects of self. And this, for me, is where this medicine really shines. So, another aspect to this concept of Hama and Wei Qi is immunity, right? For us to figure out what that I encounter is me belongs on the inside of my Hama, and what is not me belongs on the outside of my Hama. What is self and not self? And of course, there's permeability, right? There's an ability for us to let things from the outside world in, which is represented by our inhalation. And there's an opportunity to send internal things out into the world, represented by our exhalation. But there must also be uh, a strong boundary, a strong and clear understanding of what is self and what is not self. And one of the ways that topical herbal medicine can really shine is helping us define those things. Or in the case where there's damage, right, where we are letting everything in, or taking everything personally, right? Or taking everything to heart, meaning we're letting things bypass the Hama, bypass the Wei Qi. We're not identifying what we should identify with and what we should simply observe or learn from. Or on the flip side of that, when we're letting everything inside of us out, we're giving too much. We're becoming, taken advantage of or being victimized by giving too much of our internal space to other people. Then we can work with these topical herbal medicines as a way to seal up, repair, and protect these sort of perceived holes in the Hama, in the membrane that surrounds us. Another thing that I really like to meditate on is the preservation of hallow, the preservation of health, wholeness, and holiness, right? All of these have etymological roots. So when we feel like our health, our hallow, our wholeness is somehow draining out, somehow seeping out or being lost or being, sucked away by particular people or situations in life, we can engage with topical herbal medicine to again seal that perceived leak, right? To seal ourselves within ourselves, to seal in and preserve health, to seal in and preserve wholeness. And the flip side of that is deflecting the ill, right? Using topical herbal medicines, especially oils and balms, which we see in many, many magical ritual applications, to deflect incoming pathogens, whether they be physical or energetic, to deflect malefic energies or malefic people or spirits or situations, to create a hedge of protection around ourselves, which, in my opinion, is happening by engaging that herbal medicine with the Hama, right? With that membrane of light that surrounds and protects us. So, for me, this topical herbal medicine, whether it is soaking in an herbal bath, doing an oil, doing a fomentation, poultice or compress, doing a salve or a balm, all of the deeper power from that comes with interacting with this membrane of self, not self, of where we stop and the world around us begins, and how much permeability we choose to have in those spaces. Which brings me to my final point here, which is sovereignty of self, right? We're combining the power of our herbal allies with the power of therapeutic touch and the power of choosing to acknowledge ourselves as a whole self, to really put medicine into the sovereignty of self, right? To define our space, to define our bubble, to define our states of withinness. And for me, this is one of the most beautiful parts of this medicine. And on a therapeutic level, on a clinical level, I work with these topical herbal remedies more often for this kind of stuff than anything, right? We're always, of course, treating burns and cuts and scrapes and acne and dry hair and all of that, and that's great. But when we want to work on nourishing sovereignty of self, this is a really beautiful format of medicine, and it comes wrapped up in its own ritual, right? Again, we have to touch, we have to engage and acknowledge and connect. We have to explore through meditation and journey work where the parts of our body feel vulnerable, where we think those leaks and weak spots might be, where the hyperpermeability and the Hama might exist. And then we have to show up in those places through touch, through the application of intentional herbal medicine. And it's such a powerful and beautiful thing. So, all of this could seem quite new, quite fresh, quite speaking to the new age ways of things, but I assure you, these perspectives of topical medicine are rooted in the ancient. And so I'm going to share with you just three formulas, two of them from Lacnunga and one of them from Bald's Leech book, the third chapter, the third book, which is the older of the three. And my hope is that by looking at these, we can see uh, the type of reverence that our herbwise forebears have had for this kind of medicine and why it deserves to be protected and it deserves our continued adoration and engagement, right? So we'll go through these, relatively briefly. We're not going to get into all of the individual herbs and translating the herbs, but what I really want you just to see is how there was respect and how the medicine was made and applied and talked about, right? So first from Lacnunga 15, this is, by the way, all three of these, we're going to use Stephen Pollington's translation from his 2000 book, Leechcraft. This is the green salve. This is how this particular verse in Lacnunga is started. This is the green salve, right? Which for me catches my attention. And it's followed by this massive list of so many incredible herbs, all herbs that I personally would love to have in a salve. And I would imagine that this salve, properly made and extracted, probably has a green hue to it, right? We have betony, rue, lovage, fennel, sage, so many in here, right? Many herbs on this list that I bet you are familiar with, and maybe some you're not. Lots of these are in their Old English names, but they are herbs that, should we translate them into modern English or give you an analog for bioregional plants, you would probably say, oh, I know that plant. So this particular recipe, save for a few, questionable ones that I'm not super sure about, is probably relatively easy to duplicate, right? It's probably one we could actually make. You would want to be maybe ginger with the valerian, just so that it's not stinky. Also, the hedge hops, could get a little bit funky. But this is a cool one. But the reason that I added Lacnunga 15 to our discussion today is because of the last two words in the formula: oil, wax, right? So they're saying, here's all the herbs to make the green salve, and then the last two things: oil, wax. And so what are they describing here? They are describing the crafting of a salve or a balm, right? And the difference between salve and balm is just texture. A balm is a little bit denser, a salve is a little bit softer, but ultimately they are both uh, herbs, dried herbs, infused into an oil base, and then that base of oil is melted into wax, and the wax acts as a stiffener, right? Gives it body, so that when we spread it on the body, when we put it on a particular area, it stays there for some time. The wax seals that medicine in. So Lacnunga 15 gives us an example, 10th century example of how folks were honoring and acknowledging the crafting of herbal salves and balms for topical use. This is a green salve. It's very clear what it is and how we should be using it. Lacnunga 24, against a swelling. Right, this is kind of a broad spectrum swelling formula. Take lily's roots and shoots of dwarf elder, and poor leeks leaves and shred them very small and pound them greatly. So we're assuming that the plants are harvested fresh. They're shredded, cut up really small, and they are pounded to open them up, right? To break the cellular walls and the cellular tissues to make the essential oils and the fats and all the good stuff available, and put them into a thick cloth and bind them on. So here we have a compress, right? We have the herbal material itself being applied directly to the body, or with a cloth between the herbal material and the skin. Either way, it's all good. So here's a very old example, 1,000-year-old example of 3 herbs being taken fresh to make a compress against a swelling. And we have, in another format on my website, on my blog, picked this particular formula apart. Why lily's roots? Why shoots of dwarf elder? Why poor leeks leaves? This is a solid formula. This is a formula that 1,000 years later, I would use against a swelling in a heartbeat, right? In fact, I do a very similar version of this for folks dealing with plantar fasciitis and foot swelling. So there you go. There's now an example of a salve and an example of compress, both fantastic external or topical formats of herbal medicine. Let's wrap this up with one from the 3rd book of Bald's Leech book, number 29. For a burn, if one be burnt with fire alone, take a dog rose and a lily and speedwell, all very accessible plants, boil in butter and smear with it. I mentioned that I would bring up my contraindications later, and here is an example of that. I would personally not want to put heavy butter on a fresh burn. I wouldn't want to seal the heat in. I would want to make sure that that burn can breathe, that it can seep, that the body can let go of that heat. So, would need to be quite intentional about how this was done. It could be that this term smearing implies that it's put on lightly, right? It's dragged lightly across the skin, in which case I can get behind that. I also don't love boiling any fats, right? I don't love to boil oil. In fact, the other day I saw somebody making a calendula oil online, and they boiled oil and put calendula in it. And I just don't, that's not my way. When we boil fats and like oils and butters, the proteins start to break down. It's easier for them to go rancid. They smell weird. It changes the energetics, right? So just something to consider. But for a burn, if one be burnt with fire alone, right? So you have been burned by a flame, dog rose, lily, and speedwell. For a burn, if one be burnt with liquid, right? So you've spilled hot coffee, or I would say even hot oil, take elm bark and lily's root and boil in milk. Smear with it thrice a day. I actually like this one more. And by the way, both of these remedies are both part of the 29th entry in the 3rd book. So it's giving us options. Were you burnt by a fire, or were you burnt by something that just came off the fire? I like this second one more because the milk is going to have some fat, which allows for these herbs to be fully extracted, but at least the fat soluble parts of them. And then the water content in milk will take on the water soluble constituents, but it is much lighter, right? It's still going to be evaporative. It's still going to allow the skin to breathe. So I personally would not work with cow's milk, or milk from an animal, but I think sensitivity or allergy aside, if you could work with an almond milk or a hemp milk, a nut milk with a fatty content and a water content, and maybe not so much boil as low simmer. This is brilliant, right? And to me, this speaks a little bit more of a poultice, a fomentation, where we are applying a liquid to the skin and, maybe putting the liquid on, painting it on and letting it dry, or maybe in a non-burn situation, you're putting the liquid on and wrapping it to kind of seal that liquid in so it will go deep into the layers, just depending on what's appropriate for the situation, right? So again, just 3 examples. They're all so awesome, right? We just talk about these old herbals all day long, but we're going to move forward and talk about just 5 of so many herbs that are incredible allies of the external, that have such a beautiful application to external herbal medicine. And the first that I want to start with is Hypericum, also known as St. John's wort. And we have Hypericum flowers down in that first circle, and this kind of grapefruit ruby red colored oil that you see on your screen is a St. John's wort oil that I made last year. In order to get this beautiful color, to tease this out of Hypericum, the flowers have to be gathered fresh, ideally around St. John's Day, around summer solstice, and immediately put into oil to macerate for sometimes 6 to 8 weeks to coax that color out, and then you get this beautiful Hypericum oil color. So Hypericum St. John's wort is on this list, and with all the lists I do, it's very hard for me to choose just 5 or 10 or 50, but I somehow narrow it down. I will lose sleep tonight saying I should have added these other 5, right? That's just the nature of the beast for me. Hypericum St. John's wort oil is a great circulator of light. Okay, you may have heard people talk about St. John's wort being worked with as an antidepressant. I don't necessarily agree with that exact terminology, but what I will say is that St. John's wort finds the light within and allows it to circulate. And in that circulation of light, Hypericum, in my experience as an oil or a salve, as a topical herbal application, nourishes the Hama, nourishes the Wei Qi, nourishes the body of light that surrounds all of us. So this particular herb will move through the body of light, find holes, cracks, and fissures, find dark spots, places that are a little cut off, maybe we've neglected, and start giving them attention, start warming them and nourishing them. And through one means or another, gently and with love, they will bring our attention to those places, either directly or indirectly, so that we can do the work, right? Whatever needs to be done. So a little bit of sunny, warm, bright, kind of expressive energy comes from Hypericum, and this is a plant that is quite famous, really, as an external ally, right, for applying topical. St. John's wort oil is really one of the more celebrated topical herbal remedies, partly because of that color and that you have to do it just right to get the color. So you get a flex a little bit if you get it right, partly because this is just effective, right? It's very effective. I want to talk about borage. And borage, we think about borage for courage, right? This is a plant that helps us move forward into the unknown, to step outside of our comfort zone, into places that are new to us, but that open us up to new opportunities and possibilities. I really think about the demulcent quality of borage as a topical. Borage oil is fantastic for people with dry, plaquey conditions on the skin, keratinosis, eczema, psoriasis, perioral dermatitis. For most people, right? We don't make broad prescriptive things because not everything is right for everyone. But that's where I tend to work with borage the most. But I will say also that as much as we can get holes, fissures, and cracks in the Hama, we can also sort of have rigidity, right? We can have areas of that flexible membrane, if you think about it as a coating, right, that stop being so flexible, right? They stop being able to move effortlessly as we move through life in the world. And why do they do that? Because they're mirroring an internal inflexibility, right? Or they've become hardened as a way to protect us. They are essentially, the Hama is callousing. So I like to bring borage oil in as a topical for somebody who has hard spots, right? Who has places where they have become inflexible or they have been overly guarded. They can't let anything in. The Hama is hard and it's dry, right? It's like old dry wood, and we want softening. So we bring in this demulcent, mucilage rich, courage promoting plant as a topical, and it's miraculous. The magic is so powerful for people with this particular plant. And if you've never had uh, the treat of snacking on fresh borage flowers in the summer, they're nice and cool. They kind of remind me of cucumber in taste. So if you're able to grow borage, you can grow some borage and make some borage oil. Rose, of course, I prefer dog rose, the Rosa canina, but you can work with any non-Frankenstein GMO rose that is, established in the various herbal materia medica. And Rose teaches us many, many, many infinite lessons, but one of my favorite is that Rose shows us how to simultaneously be soft, open, and vulnerable while also maintaining our thorns, right? A rose on the bush will exhibit these incredibly soft, gentle, sweet, and fragrant qualities, allowing the bees and other insects to come and hang out. And um, you reach in too quick or without intention, and you get stabbed right by the thorn. So much folklore about what that thorn stab could do to somebody, which is very cool. So Rose allows us to keep the Hama, the shield of light around us, soft, permeable in ways that we choose, but also protected, right? How to be vulnerable and protected, how to be sovereign and also willing to move with things and to breathe with things, right? So, again, when people are too hardened, we can soften with rose, or when people are afraid to let that exterior down a little bit for fear of being too vulnerable or for fear of being hurt, or usually, as the case may be, being hurt again, right? We bring Rose in, and Rose will teach us how to be soft, but also keep our thorns. Yarrow is the penultimate herb of boundaries, right? You will hear people talk about that all the time. What very few people can explain is why that is. And I will tell you now. Yarrow is an herb of boundaries because yarrow is simultaneously diaphoretic and hemostatic. Okay, so yarrow will simultaneously release the exterior, allowing the pores to open so that the body can push out sweat and other energetics that we don't want inside, while also staunching the flow or loss of blood through injury. So, causes us to lose sweat and retain blood, to release what we don't want and to preserve our essence, right? This is the herbal definition of good boundaries. And Yarrow teaches that. So when folks don't have good boundaries, or when they're exploring their boundaries, or where they're stepping into spaces that are new for them, yarrow, right? And yarrow oil, yarrow balm, a little bit of yarrow added to a ritual bath, magical and powerful. Last we'll talk about is calendula, because calendula is probably the most famous herb when it comes to topical application, right? Most people have heard of a calendula oil or a calendula salve. And I want to bring this one up too, because as is the case with me, I have focused all of these other herbs on the more occult aspects of the plants and the more energetic and spiritual virtues they carry. But calendula is a plant that whenever there is a need for cleansing, purification, protection of a wound, a cut, a scrape, something like that, this is the herb that I want to bring in. The type of injury we have will define whether we can do a nice tea wash, or maybe just a steam, or maybe we can do a heavier oil or a balm, right? Not every herb is for every person, and not every format of herbal medicine is right for every type of herb. We really need to explore and pick apart the nuances in good herbalism. But calendula, a conversation about external topical herbal medicine from a Western perspective, at least, and not invoking the spirit of calendula is a fail, in my opinion, right? This is a plant that I don't think I make a topical formula in any format that we don't ask calendula to bring in their energy. Calendula is captured sunlight. Okay. This is a plant. Even the name calendula is related etymologically to the word calendar, because this is a plant that shows up in all the months, keeps track of the movement of the sun, moves their face to follow the sun, right? This is a big part of calendula folklore. And we all know that sunlight is purifying, right? And antiseptic. And so calendula will allow us to put that antiseptic sunlight where we need it most in a safe way. No sunburns, right? All the sun, none of the burn. So let me share with you a sealing wax recipe. When I talk about sealing, earlier when we talked about preserving the halu, right? Preserving wholeness, health, and holiness within. This is what I talk about sealing in. This is a really lovely wax to make, or technically a salve or balm, depending on your ratio, to use after a ritual, or after therapy, or after a meditation, or after a good dream, right? Anytime you want to acknowledge that something good has happened internally, and seal it in, ensure that you protect it and preserve it and nourish it, right? This is good sealing wax. So 3 herbs: dog rose, the flowers, juniper berries. You can use any of the Juniperus species that you have near you. Juniperus communis, osteosperma, whatever. And yarrow aerials. Take the stalks, the leaves, the flowers, all the parts. Okay, you take these 3 completely dried, mind you, and you combine them in equal parts. Equal parts of rose, juniper berry, and yarrow to fill an 8-ounce canning jar, right? Just bring it up to the top, but loose. Don't pack it. You want room in there. We're going to make a very strong oil here. And then you're going to top that with a base oil. I like olive, but you could certainly use sunflower, apricot kernel, almond, jojoba, avocado, whatever you're into. All the oils, different energetics, different properties, different feelings on the skin. Part of it is just kind of figuring out what works for you. And you top that off. You're going to need to tap and maybe stir a little bit as you go to let the oil get into all the little nooks and crannies. And you're going to put a lid on that canning jar and let it sit in a nice warm place for 2 weeks, right? Go from the new moon to the full moon. If you forget about it, that's okay. Let it go a few extra weeks. That's okay. I do like to thrice filter this particular sealing wax on the full moon, right? We're trying to draw out the power, and the power draws out with the waxing of the moon. So you can go through a sieve, and then a piece of cheesecloth, and then finally a paper filter that's thrice filtered. If you don't have the ability to do that or the skills, that's okay. Do what you can do. If you end up with a little bit of plant material in your oil, that's totally okay. Then we're going to melt that into some beeswax. We're going to combine that. And I would use a double boiler to do that, of course, kind of showing you how to do an infused oil and wax combination is beyond the scope of this class. But if you know how to do it, here's a recipe. And if you don't, I probably have some classes on YouTube you could go find. So the ratio is 1:3. We're going to take 1 part beeswax to 3 parts of our filtered oil. And you're going to very slowly and very gently melt them together in a double boiler. And when they're liquefied, pour them into a cute little tin or an upcycled bottle or whatever you have, like the one shown on the image, and let them set for an hour or 2. And you will have this beautiful textured sealing wax. You could add a few drops of essential oil if you like. You could add a few drops of vitamin E oil if you like, as an antioxidant preserve to the wax, which I do like. But you can also just leave it as is. So with that, we're going to wrap up this week's class. I want to end by inviting you over to our incredible Patreon community. If you love this content, if this gets you excited, if you want to learn more, over on my Patreon, we have an incredible group of people talking about all this stuff all the time. you will get all kinds of cool stuff by being over there and contributing to my work and helping me do what I do. The first is that you will get to participate in our monthly plant spirit journeys. So we sit with one plant every lunar cycle as a group. It's supported by a monograph, by rituals, guided meditations, herbal medicines, all kinds of cool stuff. And it creates a space where we can learn individually and collectively directly from the greatest authority on plant wisdom, the plants themselves, right? You will also get access to our monthly advanced classes, to the library of courses, to all of the guided meditation bundles, to the community chats, the book clubs, the behind the scenes, the clinicals. We do all kinds of stuff over there. It's very, very cool. If you enjoy my free content on the interwebs, that's awesome. You can contribute at $3 a month, which is going to give you the audio version of all of these classes and the ad-free version of all of these classes moving forward. There's also two more tiers, a $9 tier and an $18 tier. And that $18 a month tier is all access. It gives you everything. That's the most it's ever been. It's probably the most that ever will be in the foreseeable future anyway. So if you were interested in this stuff, we would love to have you over at that community. We're always welcoming to new people, and the folks there are great. So I hope to see you over there. There's details about that down in the video comments below. So with that, it will send you out with blessings of peace and plenty. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time.